Optimus Prime is one of the most beloved heroes in modern fiction. In fact, you can hear his voice inside your head right now if you've ever heard it. In fact, I dare you to close your eyes and just hear that.
Autobots!
It's so famous, right? Everybody knows Optimus Prime. He's a warrior, he's a protector, he's a leader, and he's the strongest being on the battlefield most of the time. A machine built to carry impossible weight while everyone else survives because he just keeps standing. And for a lot of men, this feels painfully familiar because most men were taught from a very young age that their value lives in what they can provide, what they can protect, what they can endure, how quietly they can suffer while doing it. Think of it like a bridge. Nobody notices the bridge while it's holding. People only notice when it starts to crack under the weight and fall apart. But here's the part that nobody talks about. Optimus Prime doesn't die because he's weak. He dies because somewhere along the way, he stopped believing his own survival mattered as well. I mean, I'm thinking a terrifying number of men are living exactly like this right now. Not loud, not dramatically, not consciously even, just slowly disappearing under the responsibility while the world applauds them for being dependable. Well, today we're going to talk about why so many men feel emotionally alone, even surrounded by people who love them, why modern men are quietly erasing themselves through duty, and why learning to preserve yourself is not abandoning your mission as a man. It may actually be the only way to fulfill it.
The Driven to Thrive broadcast, purpose, growth, and lasting impact for men, helping men go from living to thriving, purpose-filled, intentional lives.
There's a type of man most of us know immediately because we're either him or we worked with him, grew up with him, or depended on him. He is the guy who handles absolutely everything. He's reliable, he's steady, he's calm under pressure. Everybody calls him when things are going wrong, and everybody leans on him because, well, he always figures it out. But eventually something dangerous happens. His usefulness becomes his identity. Not intentionally, not maliciously, not because his family doesn't love him. It just kind of slowly happens over the years. The more dependable he becomes, the less people ask if he's okay with being that dependable person, because everybody just assumes he is. A lot of men help create this dynamic because they stop volunteering anything outside of performance. A lot of men can explain their work, their mortgage, their project, their mechanical problems, their finances. But if you ask them, how are you doing emotionally? Most likely you're going to get silence. Or a joke. I'm tired. Been there. I'm fine. The quintessential male answer. Not because they're lying, but because many men genuinely lost the language for themselves somewhere along the way. There's a reason the Optimus Prime thing hits men so hard. Because he never asked. He never asked, who carries me? And most men don't either. But the Apostle Paul wrote in Galatians 6:2, carry each other's burdens. But what's interesting is that most men are very willing to carry everybody else's burdens. Like everybody else's burdens. But they're absolutely terrible at allowing anyone to help carry theirs. And the problem is that's not strength. That's isolation disguised as usefulness. Even the Stoics got misunderstood in this. People quote Stoicism like it means emotional suppression. It doesn't. Let me be very clear. Marcus Aurelius never said, become emotionally numb. No, Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind. That's different. Discipline is not the absence of emotion. Discipline is learning how to process that emotion without it ruling you. A lot of men have never learned that distinction. So instead of processing grief, they bury it under productivity. Instead of processing exhaustion, we call it responsibility. Instead of processing loneliness, they just call it Leadership. Don't you love those buzzwords? But after enough years, they stop existing as a person and start just existing as a function. That's the load-bearing man. And society loves him right up until he breaks, just like a bridge. That's the dangerous part of it. The world will often reward this behavior for a very long time. The man who sacrifices everything for work gets praised. The man who never complains gets respected. The man who absorbs pressure gets quietly admired. Yeah, look at that stoic nature. Until the one day he wakes up emotionally exhausted, surrounded by people, and somehow completely alone still. But before we go further, let's check in with today's sponsor, and we'll be right back. Mike Lindell and his employees want to personally thank you for your continued support of MyPillow. They have a big allotment of their bed sheets that were earmarked for box stores this spring. Well, they did it again, and the box stores didn't come through. So they're going to pass the savings directly to you. There's no middleman, so you're going to get wholesale prices on their famous Giza Dream bed sheets, which I sleep on every night. Queen size normally $179.96. Wholesale price $69.99. King size $79.99. Another amazing deal they're offering is on their premium MyPillows. Queen size $18.98. Kings just $1 more. So go to mypillow.com and use promo code THRIVE. I know, super complicated, right? THRIVE or call 1-800-794-5834. Free shipping options are available over a certain amount with all of my discount codes. MyPillow has been good to us as sponsors for this show. They've been with us for several years now, and we're grateful for our relationship with them, not only because we use MyPillow products through my whole household, but because they make great products and they're an American-owned company owned by the employees, and we're proud to be associated with them. So remember, go to mypillow.com, scroll down to the radio podcast square, and use promo code THRIVE or call 1-800-794-5834. That's my phone number and nobody else's to get these amazing wholesale offers. Let's go on to our show. Gentlemen, welcome back to the Driven to Thrive broadcast. My name is Brent Dowlen, and if we've never met before, hey, thanks for giving us a shot and checking out the show today. Today, we're talking about something I think sits underneath the loneliness epidemic men are facing right now. Not weakness, not lack of ambition, not lack of masculinity, self-erasure through duty. The moment a man becomes so focused on carrying the mission that he quietly begins to disappear and fade away inside of it. The scary thing is, a lot of men think that disappearing is noble. One of the most dangerous lies men absorb is this: you are what you provide. Not who you are, not your character, not your heart, not your presence or your wisdom, your output, your paycheck, your production, your sacrifice, your endurance. And look, providing matters. I would never say otherwise. Leadership matters. Duty matters. Responsibility matters. And I will never be the guy telling men to become passive, soft, irresponsible, or self-centered. That is not the answer. But when usefulness becomes identity, men stop believing they have value outside of performance. And I've run into so many men that think that's all there is to life. It's kind of why we have this channel. Psychologists sometimes call this self-erasure through duty. We'll see if I can say it right today. When a man becomes so identified with what he provides that he slowly disappears underneath the responsibility of providing it. This is actually a recognized issue. Neurologically, this becomes really dangerous because the brain starts building reward associations around usefulness instead of connection. Men start getting dopamine spikes from achievement, solving problems, productivity, winning, performance. Now, let me be really clear. Men have always gotten dopamine spikes from achievement, solving problems, productivity, winning, and performance. But the problem becomes many men never build emotional reward systems around vulnerability, connection, rest, openness, receiving support. The people things. So eventually the brain literally conditions them towards performance addiction. That's why some men can't sit still. They can't rest, they can't unplug, can't stop working, can't stop fixing problems. The world will end because stillness forces them to encounter themselves outside of usefulness. A lot of men don't know who they are without a mission. That's why Wolverine is such a powerful example, right? It's something we identify with in comic books or in the movies, especially in the movie Logan. They did a really good job with that one. Logan spends almost his entire existence believing his value comes from being a weapon for other people. First he fights it, then he rages against it, then he succumbs to it. He protects, he fights, he bleeds, he endures, he carries everyone. But if you follow the storyline through the comic books or through the movies, he never actually really learns how to live. Even when people love him, he still sees himself primarily as useful, a weapon, a tool. And men resonate with that because many men secretly believe if I stop producing, I stop mattering. That's not masculinity. That's conditional existence. Jesus himself rested every now and then when he needed to. And that matters. Christ withdrew repeatedly from crowds, from demands, from expectations, not because the mission didn't matter, but because sustainable service requires renewal. Even God models rest in Genesis, not from exhaustion, from completion and rhythm. We see it in the Bible. Why did Jesus withdraw? He had to be able to continue, and for that, he needed some rebuild time. Yet modern men act like collapsing is somehow more honorable than recovering for some reason. And this is where things get really dangerous psychologically. Because once a man believes his value only exists in what he can carry, he becomes terrified of becoming a burden himself. And that fear keeps men trapped in silence longer than almost anything else. Now, I don't think most men are afraid of emotion. I think most men are afraid of losing respect, which for us is a very big thing, right? There's a huge difference. Men are often taught very early, weakness gets punished. Failure gets remembered. Vulnerability gets weaponized pretty quickly. And incompetence makes you disposable. So men learn to become emotionally self-contained. Not because they don't feel, because they do. Deeply. And if you've never heard that before as a man, you do. Deeply. You feel. But many men are terrified that if they stop carrying the weight, someone will realize that they're replaceable because they've learned that they're only useful when they're strong and producing. That's why men isolate while suffering. That's why men say, oh, I don't want to be a burden to anybody. That sentence alone has probably hidden more male depression than almost anything in modern culture. Because the provider mindset slowly teaches men your job is to absorb pain, not distribute pain, absorb pain. And eventually, men become emotionally homeless. Even inside a marriage, inside a family, inside of a friendship, there are men sitting at dinner tables every night in every part of the world who feel completely unknown. Not unloved necessarily, but unknown. And that distinction matters. Elijah in 1 Kings collapses after a major victory. This powerful prophet who stood before the kings and the false prophet suddenly sits under a tree asking God to let him die. Why? It's exhaustion. It's isolation. It's emotional depletion after a prolonged burden carrying the weight. What does God do first? God doesn't lecture Elijah. He's like, now, stop being a little girl. No. He feeds him. He lets him rest. He lets him sleep. He restores him physically before addressing him spiritually. And that's profound because sometimes the strongest men are not failing morally. They're depleted human beings trying to function beyond healthy capacity. And modern culture keeps calling this admirable. The mission does matter. Let me be clear. Your family matters, your responsibilities matter, your work matters, your purpose matters. But somewhere along the way, a lot of men were taught a very dangerous equation. If people around me are okay, then it doesn't matter what happens to me. Gentlemen, please let me tell you today, that's not strength. Because a man who destroys himself to fulfill his mission eventually leaves the people he loves carrying the wreckage of himself that he left behind. The strongest men are not the one who can suffer endlessly. The strongest men are the one who are wise enough to know what they must carry, what they were never meant to carry alone, because there are burdens you are not meant to carry by yourself. And when preserving themselves is actually part of the mission as well. It's because of these ideas that the loneliness epidemic in men that we're facing right now is so widespread. It's not just about men lacking friends, it's deeper than that. A lot of men have relationships. What they don't have is emotional permission to exist as human beings inside those relationships. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think the people who love you are trying to hammer you into the ground. I think you're so reliable and do your job so well that they don't understand that that's what's happening to you. One of the hardest things to explain to people who don't live inside the male experience. A man can be married, surrounded by children, respected at work, active in church, surrounded by his friends, active in the community, and still feel profoundly alone. Not because nobody loves him, because he feels emotionally unseen beyond what he provides. Most men were never taught they needed emotional validation and understanding, or that it's okay to need emotional validation and understanding. But you can't deny a neurological imperative even if you don't consciously know you need it. Let me say that clearly. Your brain knows it needs emotional validation and understanding. And so it creates an imperative need for you to get emotional validation and understanding. And if you don't get that, it just drives you deeper into loneliness and depression. A lot of men feel like their emotional existence only becomes visible when something stops working. That's when it gets noticed. Oh, there must be something wrong. When the paycheck stops, when the leadership cracks, when the temper flares, when the emotional control slips, when they can't carry that pressure anymore. And if we're honest, many men reinforce this dynamic accidentally because men often build relationships around activity instead of emotional transparency. I've talked many times on this show, right? We bond shoulder to shoulder, side by side. We bond at work, over work. We bond over projects, over sports, over tasks, humor, some shared frustrations and struggles, but not many men have spaces where they can safely say, you know, I'm absolutely exhausted. Not like I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm ready to fall down. I'm almost broken. Or I'm scared. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. I don't know if I can pull this off. How about I don't know if I can keep carrying this by myself. I feel disconnected from myself. Although, you know, not many men want to say that out loud because we tend not to think about things in psychological terms. How about this one? I don't even know who I am outside of responsibility anymore. I know a lot of men who say this out loud without knowing they're saying this out loud. When asked about what we do on this show, I've had men tell me like, "Wait, there is nothing beyond just providing for my family." Men I know, men I respect, men I'm close with, who have verbatim told me that that's the only point and purpose to their life. They don't have an identity outside of the responsibility they shoulder every day anymore. And the scary thing is, many men don't even realize how isolated they've become until something breaks. That's why men spiral after retirement, divorce, injury, job loss, the kids moving out, career failure, because suddenly the function has disappeared and they've never built identity underneath it. So they don't know what they're supposed to do or who they are without the function. This is where Wolverine becomes such a powerful modern example, especially in the movie Logan. If you haven't seen Logan, go see it. Or go rent it, stream it, whatever we do these days. I miss Blockbuster. I really do. I miss Blockbuster. Go rent it made a whole lot more sense than go stream it. But Logan spends his entire life surviving pain, or maybe you know him better as Wolverine, whatever name you want to put on it. He spends his entire life surviving pain. That's what he is. He is the embodiment of pain. He heals physically, but emotionally he's deteriorating the entire time. This is true in the movies, it's true in the comic books. He isolates, he pushes people away, carrying everything by himself, a lot of stuff he shouldn't be carrying. He treats connections like liabilities and treats rest like weakness. No, I love that growl. Eventually, what you see is not a strong man thriving. You see a deeply exhausted, broken shell of a man surviving, which is definitely not what we're about here on this podcast. See, there's a big difference. Modern neurosciences actually back this up too. Human beings are not designed for prolonged emotional isolation. That's why solitary confinement is such a major punishment in the prison system, right? The most effective thing for discipline with my children growing up was sending them to their room by themselves, because they're socially emotional people. Studies consistently show that chronic loneliness increases cortisol levels, inflammation, anxiety, depression, cardiovascular risk, cognitive decline. Isolation literally changes the nervous system, which means a lot of men are not just emotionally tired, their bodies are carrying isolation physically. All that extra pain, the stress, the anxiety, the soreness, the exhaustion that you can't ever get out from under. Because men are often rewarded for emotional suppression, they don't recognize the damage until burnout becomes collapse. Stoics understood something modern culture has forgotten. Seneca wrote extensively about friendship as necessary for a good life, not optional, necessary. Real strength was never meant to be solitary. That's a modern mythos, not ancient wisdom. That didn't honestly come from Stoicism. That is a bastardized concept. The whole lone wolf mythology is a bunch of crap. You don't know anything about wolves if you think that's the way life works. It's not wisdom. It's a modern misconception. Real strength was never meant to be solitary. Let's see if I can say that right. And this is where we have to be really careful, because I do not want men to hear in this episode, so responsibility is bad, sacrifice is bad, masculinity is toxic. No. Don't ever walk away from my show thinking that, because I will never tell you that. I don't believe it. I don't support it. I will never tell you that. No, not even remotely. The problem is not masculine responsibility. The problem is when man becomes disposable to himself. See, one of the horrors of modern culture is that it tells men that they're loved primarily for what they can provide. Unfortunately, a lot of men have lived enough life to feel the evidence that supports that. I sit on a men's podcast, a group forum every Thursday, and we've had this conversation over and over again, because this is what men are told brings value to us. This is why so many men feel lost in this, because men are often just celebrated for success, production, stability, solving problems, and carrying pressure, not for existing, right? There's a famous quote that says, only babies and women, and dogs are loved for existing. But it's unfortunately very true. Men are taught by our society that existing and being human doesn't give them value. It is only what they provide in the universe. And this creates an identity crisis because eventually men stop asking, who am I becoming? And start only asking, what am I accomplishing? What am I providing? And that's it. That becomes our sole existence sometimes. But your wife doesn't just need your paycheck. Your children don't just need your endurance. Your mission doesn't just need sacrifice. They need your presence, your wisdom, your emotional availability, your leadership, your humanity, your stability, your health, your longevity. They need all those things from you, and none of them have to do with your ability to produce. A burned out man can still provide financially while emotionally disappearing from everybody around him. And gentlemen, these aren't the same things. There are fathers physically sitting in their living rooms every night who emotionally left their families years ago and aren't dads. It's not because they stopped loving their family, but they became consumed by surviving responsibility. That's why the Optimus Prime analysis hurts so deeply. Men recognize the psychology immediately. The mission is bigger than the man. Every soldier in the United States military understands this at his or her deepest core. The mission is bigger than the man. And yes, sometimes that is actually true. But the mission still needs the man. That matters too. Christ says in Mark 8, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul?" That applies to more than ambition. Some men lose themselves trying to save everyone, and culture applauds them while it happens. But healthy masculinity is not self-destructive. Healthy masculinity is integrated into strength. Strength with wisdom, strength with boundaries, strength with emotional grounding, strength with identity, strength with connection, and strength with stewardship. I know this is a long list, but I want to make sure we're covering all our bases here. But that stewardship includes yourself. Because if you believe everyone else deserves care except for you, eventually resentment, exhaustion, numbness, and or collapse will follow. Not because you're weak, you're strong, but it's because you're human and you can only endure that weight so long. And once a man finally realizes, I matter too, the next question becomes, how do I actually change this? Because most men don't step out of self-erasure overnight, especially when they built their whole identity around being needed. Most men don't need less purpose. They need healthier relationship with purpose. That's different. The answer is not abandoning responsibility. It's refusing to disappear inside of it. And for many men, that starts with something incredibly uncomfortable. Admitting that they're tired. Not weak, not broken, not failures. Let's be really clear. Tired. Emotionally tired, mentally tired, spiritually tired, physically tired. And a lot of men have not said that out loud in years. We're not talking oh yeah, I'm a little tired, that we tell our spouses or we tell our kids. We're not talking that blow it off, oh yeah, I'm just tired, that we use to mask things. A lot of men have possibly never said out loud that they are emotionally tired, are mentally tired, spiritually tired, or physically tired, with the full weight of that term. Maybe decades, maybe ever. It's just not something we say. The second thing men really need is brotherhood. Not like surface level friendship, not like the guy you go sit at the bar with, or, the gym bro that you guys spot each other because neither of you actually have a workout partner. You don't actually even know his name, but you do the head nod thing. And if you're left lifting, you can be like, hey, bro. And they're like, oh, yeah, yeah. And they'll come over and spot you. Yeah, not that guy. Okay. Real friendship, real brotherhood, men who can tell the truth, men who can call you out, men who can ask the hard questions and you won't lie about it. Men who can notice when another man is disappearing beneath the weight. Because isolation lies. Isolation tells men nobody understands, nobody cares, you have to carry it alone. Asking for help makes you weak, and none of that is true. Everybody needs friends, but every man needs brotherhood. Every man needs that group of men that can see you honestly and clearly, where you're not going to be judged, but you're going to be carried as a brother. At some point, every man has to face a terrifying question. Who am I when I'm not producing? Because really, most men generally don't know. A lot of men have forgotten how to engage life outside of responsibility. Rest, it matters. Play actually really matters a lot. Faith matters. Stillness, that thing we're all afraid of, matters. Reflection matters. Not because they make you soft, because they make you reconnect with your humanity. Even physically, it matters. Sleep, exercise, nutrition, sunlight, stress management, they're not luxury topics. Your nervous system was not designed for endless hypervigilance and chronic stress. I caught myself the other night. I actually managed to sit down and take an hour and a half to myself. I went outside, I pulled out my long chair in the backyard. It was a nice evening. I've been working all day. I broke out a cigar and I just sat there and I had a drink and I smoked my cigar and I spent some time in the silence. I spent some time in the stillness. I reflected on the week and where I was and where we're going with the business. And it wasn't easy to give myself permission to do that. But this hypervigilance and chronic stress is grinding you into the ground. And spiritually, wow, men need grounding bigger than achievement. During that stillness, I spent some time in prayer because I needed to spend some time in prayer. And I get too busy a lot of times and forget to spend that spiritual time grounding myself. Look, if your identity lives entirely inside your performance, failure will destroy you. But if identity lives in purpose, faith, character, who you're becoming, the work becomes part of life instead of your entire reason for existence. And that changes things. Gentlemen, listen really carefully here. You do not stop being dependable by becoming human. You don't betray your family by taking care of yourself. You don't fail your mission by preserving your mind, your body, and your soul and your emotional health. In fact, you may finally become capable of carrying the mission sustainably for the first time in your life if you actually take the time. The tragedy of Optimus Prime was never that he was willing to sacrifice himself. The tragedy was he never believed he was allowed not to. And I think a lot of men are quietly living that same story right now. Still carrying, still producing, still protecting, still enduring, but slowly disappearing underneath the weight of being needed by everyone else. Let me be really clear, gentlemen. Being a provider is honorable. Being dependable is honorable. Being protective is honorable. But you were never meant to become emotionally disposable to yourself in the process. The people you love need more than your labor. They need you alive, they need you present, whole, they need you grounded and connected, and they need you human. because the mission matters, but so do you. And maybe real strength is finally learning that those two things were never supposed to compete with each other in the first place. I'm Brent Dowlen. This is the Driven to Thrive broadcast. And until next time, gentlemen, be better tomorrow because of what you do today. And we'll see you on the next one.
The Driven to Thrive broadcast. Purpose, growth, and lasting impact for men. Helping men go from living to thriving, purpose-filled, intentional lives.